What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Stochastic channel. And today we're talking college football DFS ahead of the 2-game Friday slate for week 3. Before we get started, make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live. And if you haven't, make sure to go to the links below, download our Stochastic avatar for DraftKings and FanDuel. We have a bunch of them to choose from, and here's why. If you place top 3 in a contest of over 5,000 contestants and tweet us your win at StochasticHOF or email it to us if you don't have Twitter, that screenshot, you're going to win a free month of Stochastic Plus Platinum. And it's a great deal. I mean, you get all our tools for free just by winning. So take advantage of that. It's a great deal. You'll see me with the avatar on the various sites. But let's get into our 2-game slate. I'll bring you to our data usage tool. If you're interested in this, it's part of our college football package. Just a fun little thing I like to use for these videos. Up at the top, you have all the matchup data between these teams. We'll talk about that. And below, all the players. So we have a 2-game slate. It's a fun one. UNLV takes on Kansas, and then Arizona takes on Kansas State on this Friday night. Good little 2-gamer. We'll kick this off with UNLV Kansas. It is a 7-point spread. It's moving down. I've seen this at 6.5 in a lot of spots already in favor of Kansas, but UNLV taking money. Total's 57.5. That's also taken a little money towards the over and touched 58 in some spots. So we'll see. But UNLV runs that go-go offense. They're going to be slower. They're 109th in pace, but they have a very heavy run rate, expected to be heavier than last year. Because of opponents right now, they're at 23.8% pass. That'll certainly rise, but we're not ever going to be looking at like a 50% pass rate from UNLV unless they're getting clobbered. Kansas is a new OC, and I'm not sure long-term what the offense is going to look like. Right now, they're 61st in pace with a 50% pass rate, so that's definitely heavier than what we saw under Kotelnicki. But they just lost to Illinois. Perhaps game script had something to do with that. DFS. A lot of good QBs on this slate, but I do like Matthew Sluka at his price for $6,900 and $8,300 on both sides, man. He just runs the ball so much. He already has 129 rushing yards. He's averaging 5.2 yards per carry, and it's a huge part of this offense. They went and brought him in from the FCS ranks where he was a dynamo on the ground. In Kansas, I think their biggest weakness this year is going to be up front. They return basically their whole secondary, and where they've struggled early this year is where they had to replace some starters, just right up front, defensive tackles for this team. Not the best matchup if you're trying to defend this go-go offense from UNLV. So right away, like Sluka, the backfield is really hard to figure out. Jaden Thomas was kind of the breakout guy last year, but we've seen them use as many as 4 backs already, which is very, very tricky for me. I thought it was going to be Jaden Thomas leading this, but in the first game, the leading carrier was actually Michael Allen, the NC State transfer, followed by Jaden Thomas at 8 carries, followed by Kylan James at 6, and followed by Greg Burrell at 4, making it even muddier. Receiver Jacob DeJesus had 3 carries, and he's had 5 carries through 2 games. And the coach actually talked about that a lot preseason. I didn't think it was going to be this kind of role, but yeah, I expect receivers, especially DeJesus, to get work in the run game. He's just an excellent ball carrier. So that's a muddy backfield. If you made me pick one, it would still be Jaden Thomas, but I think we can get other better, more condensed situations across the slate. The other thing here is this heavy run rate has affected Ricky White. His routes, everything like that, no worries whatsoever. And he has a 39% target share. So when they throw the ball, like clearly Ricky White is a priority, but you really need to ask yourself game in, game out, how much are they going to be throwing? That's going to be pivotal for when to play Ricky White at expensive price tags. But I mean, the guy had 100% route share in week 1. You're not worried there. Jacob DeJesus is there too. So the carries give him an excellent floor. I have no problem playing DeJesus at 5,400. He has 6 targets combined this year. That's a 19.5% target share, 72% route share in week 1. That was their more competitive game before they had an FCS opponent in week 2. Third, they rotated Jaden Bradley and Corey Thompson Jr. Both of them hovered right around 50% of the routes. It fluctuated a little bit game to game. I don't have a strong take on who's ahead of whom, but I would tentatively side with Bradley over Corey Thompson price, and I think his routes are going to be a little higher week in, week out. Corey Thompson jumped to 50% route share against the FCS team, so I'm kind of selling that and buying Bradley a little more as the full-time, not even full-time, just more as the wide receiver 2. And the problem with this, and why there'll probably never be a full route share between the two, is Casey Kane also plays a little bit. The Texas transfer, his routes were lower than Bradley's in week 1, but he was at 40% in week 2. So very, very volatile wide receiver 3 position. I think you see some Bradley, Kane, and Thompson all playing that position. Tight end, Kaleo Bolingay, I think is how you say that. Excuse me. Someone can probably correct me in the comments on how to actually pronounce that. He had a 61 and 70% route share the first 2 games. Just don't expect his targets to be anything close to like DeJesus or White's. And I think I would rather gamble on the rotating receivers than play him. But I'll reserve the right to change that. On the other side, Jalen Daniels, man, really concerning play in that first game. We saw him actually try. They played Lindenwood week 1, and he had a pretty early leash. Now we saw him play Illinois, and I think it was his worst game since his freshman season. Averaging 144 passing yards per game. He only has 27 rushing yards. They're passing the ball a ton, which I don't think maximizes his skill set. So I'm not sure on Daniels. He's very expensive, especially on DraftKings. FanDuel is a little more palatable. And I think I would rather play Sluke at the price. I think I would rather play Avery Johnson. I'm not sure about Fafita, but right now, as of recording this, I'm ranking him 3rd price adjusted. The player I do want to get to is Devin Neal. Early props already have him over 100 yards. That's very rich, but we've seen the efficiency incredibly good for Neal. He's already averaging 106.5 rushing yards per game. He's only carried the ball 22 times, so that's 213 total yards on 22 carries. Absurd efficiency. Well worth the price, in my opinion, especially on FanDuel. Highshaw has 9 and 7 carries, so still involved. They'll use him as a change of pace as they did last year. A little expensive for his role, but certainly playable. I think you can play them together because it's a 2-game slate. And then we basically know what's happening at wide receiver. They use 3 guys in competitive games almost every snap. The route rates here you see between 82 and 84%. All of those were above 90 against Illinois, so don't have any worries. Luke Grimm, Quentin Skinner, and Lawrence Arnold were the 3 on the field. I think Grimm is their 1, and he was hurt for parts of last year, and I think that's what allowed Lawrence Arnold to sort of overtake him. But if you're looking for a buy low, I do think Lawrence Arnold is interesting after Skinner out-targeted him 11-4. Last year, Arnold just played ahead of Skinner. So you pay $200 extra for Arnold, but I think it'll be contrarian, so maybe play that depending on your field size. Skinner right now probably projects a little bit better at the cheaper price, but Arnold, I think, is the buy low in this offense if you want to find one. And the most secure pass catcher, I do think, is Grimm. At tight end, you're looking at Jared Casey. I would rather play all the receivers than him just straight up right now. His routes were up to 66% in the second game. Cardall plays a little bit too, so that's why they're not at like 100%. All right, second game. Arizona takes on Kansas State. Similar spread, similar total. 7-point spread in favor of Kansas State. This one's moving towards Kansas State, seeing it touch 8 in spots. Haven't seen much movement in the total at 58, so there's that. Arizona 55th in pace, 54.5% pass rate. The real concern with this team is, first of all, they allowed 39 points to New Mexico, who got beat by an FCS team in week 0. Then they played an FCS team themselves in Northern Arizona, who had a really interesting defensive game plan. They put bracket coverage on Ted McMillan, and the offense failed. We saw Fafita under 7 yards per attempt. None of the other pass catchers could step up and deal with that. I mean, should have been an easier matchup. Anytime you're dedicating essentially 2 players to one, and you can't get Jeremiah Patterson to step up, Montana Lamonius Craig, like no one could step up. So, I mean, just real problems for that team. I don't know what to do with this offense if that's going to be what teams can do to beat you. The O-line has problems. Fafita last year, as good as he was, you never really saw him elevate players. I really believe in his like big time throws, turnover-worthy plays show this. He was a person that put the ball in the right spot and let Cowing and Tet go to work. Now without Jacob Cowing, just real concerns with the offense as a whole. With all that said, Fafita is still averaging about 300 yards per game, 297.5. That's because of their week 1 game. He cannot run. He did not run last year. He's very likely to finish with negative rushing yards, which makes him harder to play at 8,600, and why I think I prefer going Avery Johnson and Sluka straight up. The backfield did get narrower because Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt had some sort of eligibility thing pop up, and then they held him out. I don't think he's going to play here, but obviously watch and see. We might get some word on this, but I'm not 100% sure what the deal is on Merritt Krosky or Krosky-Merritt. I always get those two confused. From there, without him, Quaylee Conley went up to 17 carries in their next game, 5 targets of 22 opportunities. His route share spiked. He's probably just going to be mostly a full-time back, assuming Krosky-Merritt is not returning to the lineup. Kedrick Riscano, only 6 touches, and then Rayshawn Luke not playing much at all. So pseudo full-time back, feature back for Conley. Pretty good price-adjusted play if that's the role he plays. Just watch Krosky-Merritt's status. At receiver, I mean, the product of his bracket coverage, 4 targets for Ted McMillan. They got to figure out ways to move him around if that's going to be the coverage he sees. His props early on are still around like 90 yards, so I'm not going to just completely fade Ted McMillan because of that. I think you definitely still want to play some Ted McMillan, even at the elevated price. It's not the tightest slate, so you can pretty easily do so. Once you get beyond him is where things get pretty tricky. The routes are sort of all over the place for this team, and excuse me, I don't think they're ever really going to consolidate. Montana Lamonius Craig is pretty firmly at 65% of the routes. Jeremiah Patterson is hovering between, he went from 56 to 48. They use 2 tight ends more than you would expect. Keon Burnett is probably the second guy you should look at, even though he has just 2 targets in back-to-back games, but 93% of the routes in week 2. But the 12 personnel comes into play with Tyler Powell also at 31. So a lot of double tight end stuff. And then just Malachi Riley's on the field sometimes, like an occasional snap here and there from Devin Hyatt or Chris Hunter. It's a pretty big mess beyond the Ted McMillan, Keon Burnett, and I guess I'll throw Montana Lamonius Craig in there. So not a ton of real optimism for the pass catchers, but Burnett's at least cheap at 3,400. To the Kansas State side, 41% pass rate. They're 96th in seconds per play. This team just had a really close game against Tulane that took a defensive score to kind of get them over the board. But Avery Johnson has excellent mobility, 77 yards, 4.3 yards per carry already for him. As a passer, he's still developing a little bit, but he's not a complete stiff back there either. Pretty efficient. I think just really the rushing floor is what gets you there and makes me think he's the top quarterback on the slate against Arizona's defense, who's been gashed twice now. I'll just take the rushing and the passing when they both come with him. In the backfield, Giddens, monster workload. We're coming off a 25 opportunity game, 19 carries, 6 targets, 58% route participation. The only hesitation I have here is he was kind of stuck in the mud at times. And the second they gave Dylan Edwards the ball, you saw explosive plays. This is very hard to project, but I think you do see a little more Dylan Edwards moving forward, probably at the expense of Giddens, just because they don't really have anyone else touch the ball anyway. The Joe Jackson carries and stuff you saw in week 1, that's opponent related. He's not going to play regularly. So I don't know. I would probably put this around like 17 carries for Giddens, 7 for Dylan Edwards, maybe even like 15 to 8, something in that range, but more of a split than what we've seen. And Edwards is an excellent pass catcher, so I don't know that 58.5% route share is locked in for Giddens either. At least a concern. It's a 2-game slate. I think you just play a little bit of them both. And still, Giddens is a top 3 back. It's in some order. I'm not sure which right now. It's Neal, Conley, and Giddens, in my opinion. Giddens also leads the team in targets, which is shocking, but is what it is. Receiver. I think we got Jace Brown as the wide receiver 1 for this offense. Again, they haven't passed the ball a lot, so we're still kind of waiting to see them actually unleash it. But Brown, he went to 85% of the routes in week 2. Keegan Johnson went to 81%. And then Dante Cephas was 3rd. He was at 59, which was a little surprising to me. I thought we'd see more Jaden Jackson, but he came in at 26%. I think that's kind of the rotation we see to start the year with locked in 2 wide receiver sets, mostly Brown and Johnson. The 3rd wide receiver largely being Dante Cephas, and then Jaden Jackson coming in for rotational snaps. The number 1 tight end is Garrett Oakley, 63% of routes, but it's a bit of a timeshare. Lofton had 22%, as did Swanson. So it's not the Ben Sano we saw from last year. There is a little more rotation than we've previously seen for this team. But none of them are very expensive. I'm completely fine getting in, like Spivey being fourth in targets. You can see the 15% route rate. Don't buy into that. Buy low on like Keegan Johnson, but very cheap receivers. For that reason, I'm probably going to have Johnson stacked in most lineups. Not because he's a prolific passer or anything like that. It's just you're getting such cheap price tags on these guys. Really high team total, 32.5. I think it makes sense to throw them into some lineups. That'll do it for us for the 2-game slate. Thank you for watching. We'll be back shortly with the main slate for Saturday. Until then, good luck, everyone. We'll see you next time.